They thought they could harass him because of his skin color. They weren't ready for his real identity. Maplewood Crest. Picture-perfect suburbia. Manicured lawns, hushed streets, the kind of place where folks wave hello even if they don't know you. Mostly white, mostly well-off. The kind of peace and quiet many people dream of. This morning, the sun dripped gold through the leaves, painting shadows on the sidewalk outside tidy homes. Birds chirped their morning greetings. Everything looked perfectly normal. Perfectly ordinary. Then came Mr. Elijah Vance. A black man, strong build, maybe late 40s, in simple jogging gear, dark athletic shorts, a gray moisture-wicking tee, and running shoes that had seen miles. His face was focused, determined, eyes scanning the path ahead. He moved with a quiet dignity, a steady rhythm to his stride. Just a man out for a morning run in his neighborhood. Or so it seemed to anyone who bothered to look at all. A black and white police cruiser, number 217 on the side, rolled silently to a stop beside him. Tires hissed on the asphalt. Senator Vance barely broke his stride, glancing over as the passenger side window whirred down. Officer K. Miller, name tag crisp on his uniform, leaned out, his face shadowed by his sunglasses and the cruiser's roof. Beside him, Officer J. Davis watched silently. "Morning," Miller said, a slight drawl to his voice. Not exactly friendly, not exactly hostile. Just observant. "You live around here?" It wasn't an outright accusation, but the tone carried a weight. "You don't look like you belong here," hung unspoken in the air. Vance slowed to a walk, his breath evening out. "Yes, officer, I do." He kept his voice even, polite. Miller's eyes flicked over Vance's clothes, lingering a fraction too long on his skin. "Just hadn't seen you before. We get reports, suspicious activity." Davis in the driver's seat chuckled softly, a low rumble. Suspicious activity. A black man jogging. Vance met Miller's gaze directly, no flinching. "Understandable, officer. Keeping the neighborhood safe is important." He even managed a small, almost polite nod. Inside, though, a familiar coldness was settling. He knew this script. The script of being questioned, of being seen as out of place, of needing to justify his very presence. But outwardly, professional. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing him sweat. Not physically, and certainly not emotionally. Miller straightened up, his tone hardening a notch. "License and ID." It wasn't a request, it was an order. The suspicious activity was escalating quickly. Davis shifted in his seat, now watching Vance with open amusement, a smirk playing on his lips. The subtle disrespect was gone, replaced by something sharper, more pointed. Miller's hand hovered near his holster for a split second, a fleeting gesture, but clear enough. It was a power play, a not-so-veiled threat. "Just standard procedure, sir," Miller continued, the sir dripping with sarcasm. "We have to be careful in neighborhoods like Maplewood Crest. Maintain the standards." Davis chuckled again, louder this time, a snort of laughter that underlined Miller's words. They assumed so much. Assumed Vance was an outsider, a potential problem, simply because of his skin color in this white enclave. Their uniforms, their cruiser, the badge, in their minds, it granted them the right to stop, question, and intimidate anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of belonging. Their arrogance was palpable, fueled by prejudice and the unthinking confidence of authority. They saw Vance not as a resident, not as a man, but as a type, a category, a suspicious black male in a good neighborhood. Vance felt his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Patience. Elijah. Patience. He reached into his back pocket with slow, deliberate movements, retrieving his wallet. Inside, his senatorial ID sat nestled amongst his credit cards, a stark contrast to the situation unfolding on this suburban street. A bitter irony twisted in his gut. He, a lawmaker, a servant of the people, being treated like a criminal in his own community by the very people sworn to protect and serve. He could feel the heat rising behind his calm facade, the urge to unleash the truth, to watch their smug faces crumble. But not yet. Not now. He would play this out, one excruciating, prejudiced step at a time. He handed Miller his driver's license, a local address clear beneath his name. He kept the senatorial ID hidden, a trump card held close. Miller barely glanced at the license. He held it loosely, tapping it against his palm, his gaze still fixed on Vance. Elijah Vance, he read aloud, dragging out the name as if tasting something unpleasant. Live right here in Maplewood Crest, huh? Weird, like I said. Never seen you around. Davis leaned forward now, resting his arms on the dashboard, his smirk widening. Maybe he's visiting. Or, maybe he's just passing through. Know what I mean, Officer Miller. The passing through hung heavy with implication. They were no longer even pretending to believe he belonged. The casual stop had morphed into a deliberate act of harassment, fueled by their unchecked prejudice. Inside, Senator Vance's carefully constructed wall of composure began to crack. The years of navigating casual racism, the constant low hum of prejudice in everyday life, it all coalesced in this moment. His fists clenched subtly inside his pockets. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. Rage, cold and sharp, threatened to surface. He fought it back, a lifetime of practiced restraint kicking in. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. Not yet. He focused on staying present, on keeping his voice steady, even as his patience frayed to a thread. Miller tossed the license back dismissively. It fluttered and landed on the sidewalk near Vance's feet. Pick that up, Mr. Vance. He used air quotes around the name, the mockery blatant now. And you know what? Just to be sure, we're going to need to pat you down. Standard procedure for visitors in Maplewood Crest. Davis guffawed, reaching for the car door handle. It wasn't just the pat-down itself, the physical violation, the utter lack of justification. It was the deliberate, sneering humiliation, the casual dehumanization. Visitors. Like he was an unwelcome intruder in his own home. Like his very presence was an offense. That word. Visitors. Something snapped. That was it. The last straw. The point of no return. The mask of calm was about to shatter. Senator Vance stopped walking. He didn't bend to pick up his license immediately. Instead, he straightened his posture, drawing himself up to his full height. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face the officers, his gaze locking onto Officer Miller, who was just stepping out of the cruiser, a smug look plastered across his face. Davis was now fully out of the car as well, mirroring Miller's posture, ready to escalate. They expected compliance, perhaps even fear. They were about to get something very different. Vance's voice, when he spoke, was low, steady, and resonated with an unexpected authority that cut through the suburban morning air. Officers, he began, his tone devoid of anger, but laced with a quiet steel. With all due respect, I believe you've made a rather significant misjudgment. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, watching as the smirks on their faces wavered, just for a fraction of a second. My license clearly states my address. I reside in Maplewood Crest. Just like you. Except, he let another beat pass, his eyes unwavering. Unlike you, I believe I am being judged, not by my actions, but by my appearance. An abrupt silence descended. Davis actually stopped mid-step, his foot hovering above the pavement. Miller's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion? Uncertainty? The easy arrogance they had worn just moments before seemed to deflate, replaced by a hesitant stillness. The dynamic had shifted. The jogger was no longer simply a subject to be questioned and intimidated. He was something else. They just didn't know what yet. Senator Vance slowly reached back into his pocket, this time retrieving his wallet fully. He opened it deliberately, not to his driver's license section, but to a different compartment. He extracted a different ID card, thicker, more official-looking, bearing the seal of the United States Senate. He held it out, not waving it, but presenting it calmly, letting the morning sunlight catch the embossed gold. Perhaps, he said, his voice still measured, you are unfamiliar with all the residents of Maplewood Crest, officers. Some of us, he paused again, letting the significance of the moment sink in, hold positions that might surprise you. As he spoke, a sleek black SUV turned the corner onto the street, approaching slowly. It wasn't a police vehicle. Officer Davis was the first to visibly react. His jaw dropped, his eyes widening behind his sunglasses as he stared at the senatorial ID, then back up at Vance's face, then back to the ID again. The smirk vanished completely, replaced by a slack-jawed astonishment. Officer Miller, initially slower on the uptake, finally followed Davis's stunned gaze. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the card in Vance's hand. Recognition dawned, flooding his face with a sickly pallor that spread from his neck upwards. His hand, which had instinctively drifted towards his holster again, froze mid-air, then slowly, almost reluctantly, dropped to his side. The approaching SUV, with its tinted windows and official plates, served as a silent, undeniable confirmation. They knew. They understood. The jogger wasn't just some suspicious black man. He was Senator Vance. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft purr of the approaching SUV's engine. Miller's face was now a mask of mortification mixed with dawning fear. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. His eyes darted nervously between the senatorial ID, the SUV, and his partner Davis, who was still frozen, his mouth slightly agape. Shame, hot and prickly, began to creep up Miller's neck. Davis finally found his voice, but it was a choked whisper, barely audible. "Senator Vance." It was half question, half desperate plea for clarification, as if somehow saying the words aloud would magically undo the reality of the situation. Their carefully constructed wall of authority, their smug superiority, had crumbled in an instant, replaced by the stark, chilling realization of their colossal misjudgment. They weren't just wrong. They were profoundly, career-rendingly wrong. The black SUV glided to a stop behind the police cruiser. The rear passenger door opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed black woman stepped out, her expression coolly professional. She approached Senator Vance, her gaze sweeping dismissively over the two officers. "Senator Vance, are you all right? We were just moments behind you." Her words, spoken with quiet authority, were the final nail in the coffin of the officer's arrogance. Senator Vance nodded curtly to her, without taking his eyes off the two officers. The senatorial ID remained in his hand, a silent symbol of the power he now held in this suddenly charged suburban street. The power to address this situation. The power to make them answer for their prejudice. The power to ensure this would not happen again. Senator Vance finally lowered the senatorial ID, but held it loosely in his hand, a silent weight in the charged air. He addressed officers Miller and Davis, his voice carrying a new weight of authority, yet still controlled. "Officers," he began, his gaze sweeping between them, sharp and unwavering. "What started as a standard procedure stop, based on nothing more than my appearance in this neighborhood, has escalated into a textbook example of racial profiling and blatant disrespect. You questioned my residency, demanded my papers with unwarranted suspicion, and subjected me to humiliating treatment, culminating in a threatened pat-down based on, what exactly? My skin color. The neighborhood I choose to live in." He let the questions hang, unanswered, the silence itself a damning indictment. "You swore an oath to protect and serve all citizens, not just those who fit your preconceived notions of who belongs in Maplewood Crest." He paused, taking a deliberate breath, and the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. "Therefore," Senator Vance stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt, "effective immediately, both of you are relieved of your duties. Your behavior is not only unacceptable, it is a profound betrayal of the principles of law enforcement and the trust placed in you by this community." He nodded curtly to the woman who had arrived in the SUV. "Agent Thompson, please ensure these officers are disarmed and escorted back to the precinct. Initiate termination proceedings immediately. And," he added, turning back to the now ashen-faced officers, his voice hardening further, "make sure this incident, every detail of it, is documented and made part of their permanent record. Let it serve as a clear message. Racial discrimination will not be tolerated, especially not within the ranks of those entrusted to uphold justice." Miller and Davis stood frozen, their bravado completely evaporated, replaced by a chilling understanding of the gravity of their actions. The word termination hung heavy in the air, a death knell to their careers. "Consider this," Senator Vance continued, his gaze narrowed, pointedly referencing their earlier actions. "The consequence for your assumptions, your mockery, your demeaning visitor comment, and for treating a fellow resident as a criminal simply because of the color of his skin while jogging in his own neighborhood. Remember this moment, officers. Remember the price of prejudice." Agent Thompson stepped forward, her movements crisp and efficient, taking charge as instructed. Senator Vance watched as the officers, now utterly deflated, were directed back to their cruiser, their heads bowed, the weight of their actions crushing their former arrogance. He had spoken, he had acted, and the consequences were immediate and decisive. Shame radiated off Miller and Davis in waves. Their faces were pale, etched with a mixture of fear, regret, and humiliation. The swagger was gone, replaced by the stark reality of their professional downfall. They had gone from positions of perceived power to men stripped bare by their own prejudice. The immediate atmosphere on the quiet street had shifted dramatically. The tension remained, but it was now a tension of consequence, of accountability. The power dynamic had completely inverted. Senator Vance, the suspicious jogger moments before, now stood as the figure of authority, justice delivered in the clear light of day. Months later, Maplewood Crest wasn't visibly different at a glance. The lawns were still manicured, the streets still hushed. But beneath the surface, a shift had occurred. Cruiser 217 was never replaced. The story of the senator and the jogger became a local legend, whispered amongst neighbors, a stark reminder. New diversity and sensitivity training was implemented within the Maplewood Police Department, spearheaded directly by a Senator Vance initiative. Senator Vance, in his public role, became a vocal advocate for police reform and racial justice. His Maplewood Crest incident a powerful, personal anecdote in every speech. The quiet streets of Maplewood Crest began to see more diverse faces jogging, walking, simply being. A subtle thawing of the once exclusive atmosphere. Sometimes, in the early mornings, Senator Vance would jog those same Maplewood Crest streets, a quiet sense of satisfaction accompanying his steady rhythm. Change was slow, but it was happening. And so, Maplewood Crest, once a symbol of suburban homogeneity, began its journey toward becoming a place where true community meant respect and belonging for all, regardless of appearance. A testament to the enduring power of standing up, even in the face of prejudice, to ensure justice finds its way onto even the quietest of streets. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone unfairly judged you based on appearance? Share your experience in the comments. If you enjoyed this and want more content on Inspiring Black Stories channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to prioritize what matters more than the fear itself.